I never expected my trip to Africa to change my life. It started with a small accident, a deep cut on my leg during a hike. I ended up in a local hospital, nervous and unsure of what to expect. That's where I met him. Dr. Elijah Mensah, tall, muscular, with a calm presence that made me feel instantly at ease. From the moment our eyes met, I knew this encounter was going to be unforgettable. Have you ever had an unexpected moment change everything? Follow this story of love and discovery to see how one meeting can transform a life. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications for the next chapters. The hospital was small with pale walls and the faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. I limped through the entrance, clutching a makeshift bandage around my leg. The cut wasn't life-threatening, but it was deep enough to need stitches. My heart raced, more from nerves than pain, as I approached the reception desk. "Take a seat," the nurse said kindly, her accent thick but her words clear. I nodded, settling into a worn-out chair in the waiting area. It was quiet, except for the occasional hum of conversation from nearby rooms. I was trying to calm my nerves when I heard a deep, soothing voice. "Who's next?" I looked up, and there he was. Dr. Elijah Mensah. He stood tall, easily over 6 feet, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. His dark skin glistened slightly under the warm light, and his fitted scrubs hinted at his strong, athletic build. But it was his eyes that struck me the most, warm, steady, and filled with reassurance. "That would be me," I said, raising my hand slightly as I struggled to stand. He walked toward me with calm confidence, extending a hand to help me up. His grip was firm but gentle, and I couldn't help but notice the strength in his hands as he guided me into the examination room. Once inside, he gestured for me to sit on the exam table. "Let's take a look at that leg," he said in a voice that was both professional and kind. His accent was subtle, his English clear and deliberate. As he knelt to inspect my injury, I felt my pulse quicken, not from the pain but from how close he was. His hands were steady as he removed the bandage, his touch sending a strange warmth through me. He glanced up briefly, catching my gaze. "It's a clean cut, but it needs stitches," he said, his tone calm and reassuring. "Nothing to worry about?" I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. He began cleaning the wound with careful precision, and I couldn't help but notice how his focus never wavered. Every movement was deliberate, every action filled with care. It was like he wasn't just treating a wound, he was making sure I felt safe. "Where are you from?" he asked, breaking the silence as he worked. "New York," I replied. "I'm here for a few weeks, just traveling." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Africa has a way of surprising visitors. Hopefully, this will be the only surprise during your stay." I chuckled nervously, unsure if the fluttering in my chest was from his words or the way his fingers brushed against my skin as he worked. The room fell into a comfortable silence, the only sounds coming from the tools he used and the steady rhythm of my breathing. When he finished stitching the wound, he stood and met my eyes again. "All done. You'll need to keep it clean and avoid strenuous activity for a while." "Thank you, Dr. Mensah," I said, finally finding my voice. "I really appreciate it." His smile widened, and for a moment I felt like the world outside didn't exist. "Call me Elijah," he said, his voice softening slightly. "Take care of yourself, okay?" As I left the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time I'd see him. Something about the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, left a lasting impression. It wasn't just the kindness of a doctor. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite define. The days after my hospital visit passed in a blur, but my mind kept drifting back to Elijah. There was something magnetic about him, his calm demeanor, his reassuring voice, and the way he looked at me with such genuine care. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting attraction. But deep down, I knew I wanted to see him again. A week later, I was walking through the bustling marketplace of the village, soaking in the vibrant colors and sounds of local life. Vendors called out, selling everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. The aroma of spices filled the air, mingling with the laughter of children playing nearby. It was a world so different from what I was used to, yet it felt oddly comforting. As I turned a corner, I saw him. Elijah. He was standing by a fruit stall, his tall frame impossible to miss. He wasn't wearing his scrubs this time. Instead, he was dressed casually in a simple white t-shirt that hugged his muscular chest and dark jeans that emphasized his strong build. He looked so different outside the hospital, yet just as striking. Before I could second-guess myself, I called out, "Elijah!" He turned, his eyes lighting up with recognition as a smile spread across his face. "New York," he said, his deep voice cutting through the noise around us. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." I laughed, feeling a wave of nervous excitement wash over me. "I could say the same about you. Do you always make house calls at the market?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not exactly. I come here on my days off to pick up fresh fruits. It's one of my favorite parts of living here." There was something so disarming about how he spoke, as if every word carried a piece of his soul. Before I knew it, we were walking through the market together, weaving between the stalls as we talked. He told me about his childhood in the village, how he'd worked hard to become a doctor, and how much he cared for the community he served. "I love this place," he said, gesturing around us. "It's not perfect, but it's home. The people here, they're family to me." His words struck a chord. Back in New York, I had everything I could ever want: comfort, convenience, success. But I realized I lacked the sense of belonging Elijah spoke of. It made me admire him even more. As we walked, a sudden downpour of rain caught us off guard. Vendors scrambled to cover their goods, and people darted for shelter. Elijah grabbed my hand without hesitation, pulling me under the awning of a nearby shop. His grip was strong but gentle, sending a jolt of warmth through me. We stood there, the rain pounding against the ground, the air filled with the earthy scent of wet soil. I looked at him, water dripping from his short-cropped hair onto his t-shirt, and realized I was staring. He noticed too, his eyes locking onto mine. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice barely audible over the rain. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm still getting used to everything here." He tilted his head, studying me with a curious expression. "It takes time, but maybe that's a good thing. Sometimes it's the unfamiliar that teaches us the most." His words lingered in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I wanted to say something, to tell him how much his presence had already started to shift something inside me. But before I could, the rain began to let up. "Looks like it's clearing," Elijah said, breaking the tension with a small smile. "Let me walk you back. The roads can get slippery after the rain." I nodded, still unable to find the right words. As we walked back toward my guest house, I couldn't help but feel that this wasn't just a chance meeting. It felt like something bigger, something I wasn't ready to name yet. The walk back to my guest house was quiet at first. The rain had left the streets damp, the earthy scent of wet soil lingering in the air. Elijah walked beside me, his presence steady and comforting. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, even with the space between us. "You've been here for a while now," Elijah said, breaking the silence. "What do you think of it so far?" I hesitated, unsure how to put my thoughts into words. "It's different," I admitted. "In a good way, though. Everything here feels more real, I guess." He smiled at that, his expression softening. "It has a way of grounding you, doesn't it? Life here isn't always easy, but it's honest." I nodded, my thoughts drifting back to New York, the noise, the rush, the constant striving for more. Being here felt like stepping into a completely different world, one where things slowed down and people connected on a deeper level. As we reached the guest house, Elijah stopped at the gate. "This is you, right?" "Yeah," I said, turning to face him. "Thanks for walking me back. I didn't realize how slippery those roads could get." He chuckled, his deep voice sending a shiver down my spine. "It's no problem. I wouldn't want you to end up back at the hospital on my watch." The mention of the hospital brought back the memory of our first meeting, and I couldn't help but smile. "You know, I never got to thank you properly for helping me that day." He tilted his head, his gaze searching mine. "You don't have to thank me. It's my job." "Maybe," I said, feeling a surge of courage. "But you didn't have to care as much as you did. That meant a lot to me." For a moment, the space between us seemed to shrink. Elijah's expression softened, and I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite name. "You're welcome," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." He turned to leave, but I stopped him. "Wait," I said, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess them. "Do you want to stay for a while? I mean, I was going to make some tea. It's the least I can do to thank you." Elijah hesitated, his gaze flickering between me and the street. For a moment, I thought he might say no, but then he nodded. "Sure. Tea sounds nice." We sat on the small porch of the guest house, a steaming pot of tea between us. The rain had left the air cool, and the distant sound of crickets filled the silence. As we talked, I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't expected. I told him about my life back home, about the pressure to always achieve more, and about how lost I'd felt before coming here. Elijah listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finally paused, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "It sounds like you've been running for a long time," he said. "Maybe being here is your chance to slow down and figure out what really matters." His words hit me harder than I expected. He was right. I'd been so caught up in chasing success that I'd forgotten to think about what I truly wanted. And now, sitting here with him, I realized that what I wanted was starting to change. As the conversation flowed, the atmosphere between us grew warmer, more intimate. I found myself drawn to the way he spoke, the way he carried himself with such quiet confidence. When our hands brushed as I poured another cup of tea, I felt a spark, a connection I couldn't ignore. Elijah seemed to feel it too. He glanced at me, his gaze lingering for just a second longer than necessary. Neither of us said anything, but the unspoken tension hung in the air, heavy and electric. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the gate, turning back to look at me. "Thank you for the tea, and for the conversation." "Any time," I said, my voice softer than I intended. As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The connection I felt with him was undeniable, but I wasn't sure if I had the courage to take the next step. The days after Elijah's visit felt different. The guest house seemed quieter, my usual routines less engaging. I found myself replaying our conversations, his words echoing in my mind. Maybe being here is your chance to slow down and figure out what really matters. Was this what I needed? Or maybe who I needed? I wasn't sure if I'd see him again anytime soon, but fate had other plans. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the village, I decided to take a walk. The streets were peaceful, the soft hum of distant voices and the occasional laughter adding to the calm atmosphere. I turned a corner near the local clinic, and there he was. Elijah. He stood by a group of children, crouched down to their level as he handed out small packets of medicine. His white t-shirt clung to his broad shoulders, and his jeans were slightly dusty from the day's work. The children giggled and chatted with him, their faces lighting up as he spoke. It was clear he was more than just a doctor to them. He was a pillar of the community. I watched from a distance, not wanting to interrupt, but he spotted me almost immediately. His face broke into a warm smile, and he waved me over. "New York," he called out, his voice carrying a teasing lilt. I laughed as I approached. "I'm starting to think that's my official name here." "Well, it suits you," he replied, his grin widening. "What brings you out this evening?" "I needed some air," I said, glancing at the children who were now scampering off with their treasures. "And I guess I got lucky running into you." He chuckled, standing to his full height. "You're just in time. I was about to head back to the clinic. Want to walk with me?" "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. We walked side by side, the clinic just a short distance away. As we neared the entrance, Elijah stopped and turned to me, his expression more serious now. "Can I show you something?" he asked. "Of course," I said, curious. He led me around the back of the clinic to a small garden I hadn't noticed before. It was simple but beautiful, with rows of medicinal plants and flowers neatly arranged. The fading sunlight bathed everything in a soft, golden light. "I started this garden a few years ago," Elijah said, his voice low and contemplative. "Most of these plants have healing properties. It's my way of giving back to the community, of reminding myself why I do this." I looked at him, his profile illuminated by the setting sun. There was a vulnerability in his voice I hadn't heard before, and it made my chest tighten. "It's incredible," I said, and I meant it. "You've created something beautiful here." He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "I think it's important to create things that last, don't you? Things that matter." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. There was something about the way he looked at me in that moment that made it hard to breathe. The tension between us was palpable, the unspoken connection we'd been dancing around for days now impossible to ignore. Before I could second-guess myself, I spoke. "Elijah, I feel like I've been running from a lot of things in my life. But being here, meeting you, it's made me realize I don't want to run anymore." His expression softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, something more than just kindness. He stepped closer, the space between us shrinking. "I've felt it too," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Since the moment you walked into that hospital, there's been something I can't ignore." The air between us felt electric, every sound around us fading into the background. Elijah raised a hand, hesitating for just a second before brushing his fingers against my cheek. His touch was warm, sending a shiver down my spine. Neither of us spoke, but we didn't need to. The moment was enough, a shared understanding, unspoken but undeniable. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The days following our moment in the garden were a mix of euphoria and uncertainty. The connection between Elijah and me was undeniable, but the differences in our backgrounds and the expectations of society loomed over us like a dark cloud. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch of the guest house, Elijah appeared, his expression serious. "We need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with concern. My stomach tightened. "What's wrong?" He sat beside me, avoiding my gaze. "People are talking about us. In this village, news travels fast. Some aren't looking kindly on our friendship." A wave of fear and anger washed over me. "But we're not doing anything wrong." He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with conflict. "I know that, but perception can be dangerous. For you, as a foreigner, this might just be a passing scandal. For me, it could mean losing everything." The gravity of his words hit me like a punch to the chest. I hadn't fully considered the risks he was taking. "Elijah, I don't want to cause trouble for you," he sighed, running a hand over his head. "I don't want you to get hurt either, but we have to be careful." The tension between us was almost unbearable. I wanted to reach out, to hold him, to promise that everything would be okay, but I knew it wasn't that simple. "Maybe we should put some distance between us," I suggested, though the thought tore at my heart. He shook his head. "I don't know if I can do that, but I also don't know how we can go on like this." Before we could say more, a group of men appeared on the road, walking toward us. I recognized a few of them as locals I'd seen around the village. "Elijah," one of them called, his voice sharp. "We need to talk to you." Elijah stood, his posture tense. "What's this about?" The man glanced at me with disdain before turning back to Elijah. "People are talking about you and the foreigner. This is unacceptable." I felt the blood drain from my face. The situation was escalating faster than I'd expected. "We're not doing anything wrong," Elijah said, his voice steady. "That doesn't matter," the man shot back. "Appearances matter. You're bringing shame to this community." Anger bubbled up inside me. "You have no right to judge us." The man stepped toward me, but Elijah raised a hand, stopping him. "Please, let's resolve this peacefully." The tension was thick in the air. I could see the conflict in Elijah's eyes, torn between protecting himself and me. Finally, the man stepped back, but not without a warning. "This is your only caution. Watch your actions." As they walked away, Elijah turned to me, his eyes heavy with sadness. "Now you see what we're up against." I nodded, feeling the weight of reality pressing down on us. "What do we do now?" He let out a deep breath. "We have to be more careful, but I don't want to lose what we have." "Neither do I said firmly. "We'll find a way to make this work." The confrontation with the locals had left me shaken, but it also solidified something deep inside me. Whatever was growing between Elijah and me wasn't something I was willing to let go of. As much as the world around us tried to tear us apart, I knew I had to fight for what we had, even if I wasn't entirely sure where it would lead. A couple of days later, Elijah came to the guest house in the evening. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the village. He looked tired but determined, his broad shoulders tense as he stood on the porch. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer this time. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. We sat on the porch, the fading sunlight painting everything in hues of orange and pink. The quiet hum of the village in the background felt almost surreal. "I've been thinking about everything," Elijah began, his hands clasped together as he leaned forward. "About us, about what's happening. And I've realized something." I stayed silent, my heart pounding in anticipation of what he was about to say. "I can't keep pretending that this doesn't mean something," he said, finally looking at me. "What I feel for you, it's real. And it's terrifying because I've spent my whole life trying to do what's expected of me. To keep my head down, to serve my community, to follow the rules. But with you, it feels different. It feels right." His words hit me like a tidal wave. For a moment, I couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the weight of his confession. When I finally found my voice, it was trembling but firm. "I feel the same way, Elijah. Being here, meeting you, it's changed everything for me. I don't know where this will lead, but I know I want to find out. With you." A silence settled between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where words weren't needed, where the emotions were loud enough to fill the space. Slowly, Elijah reached out, his hand brushing against mine before taking it fully. His touch was warm and grounding, a reassurance that we were in this together. "I don't know what's going to happen," he admitted, "but I'm willing to try, if you are." "I'm all in," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into twilight, Elijah leaned closer. Our foreheads touched, and for a moment it felt like the entire world had fallen away. When our lips met, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was soft, deliberate, filled with all the emotions we'd been holding back. The kiss ended, but the connection between us remained, stronger than ever. He smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that made my heart ache in the best way. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said. "Together." "Together," I echoed, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them side by side. This story is a reminder that love often shows up when we least expect it, in places we'd never imagined. It challenges us, transforms us, and teaches us about ourselves in ways we never thought possible. Have you ever experienced a connection so strong it changed your life? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more stories like this one. Your support helps us share these moments of love and discovery with the world.